back to my channel. I hope that you're doing well. Welcome to another video. This is part 2 to my books that made me series. This is the books that made me cry, part of this 2-part series, and I'm very excited to be sharing that with you guys today. If you guys didn't watch my last video, feel free to go check that out. I'll leave that in the cards above. Some of the books that are in this video will be a repeat from last video, but that's because a lot of these books have some dual representation in there, some very happy things and some very sad things, and so for that reason they are being multi-used in these videos, but I hope you don't mind. That way you kind of get both aspects of my feelings towards these books. But without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the books that made me cry. Okay, the first book that I want to talk about is a book that I was very surprised by, and a book that I was surprised that made me cry, but after reading it and understanding the hard topic that this book was, I totally understand why I had all the feels that I did, and that is The Sweetest Kind of Poison by Katie Wimser. This is her very first poetry collection that she published, and it was so fantastic. This book talks about, and is a collection of poems about an abusive relationship, and it was just such a fantastically written poetry collection that you can really tell that Katie really just filleted herself open and allowed people to see the real emotions, the raw emotions that she was feeling when she put these words onto paper. And the amount of love and acceptance that she has for herself and the respect that she has for herself at the end of this, you just see the transition of her coming full circle into understanding that she is enough without the presence of that relationship in her life. And some of the poems in here were just so amazing, so like hard-hitting and deep, and it punches you right in the gut. And towards the very end, when she was talking about being enough, like I just got really choked up and I started crying, because sometimes you just need to hear that about yourself, that no matter the circumstances, no matter who you're around, no matter who you're with, without them you are enough, and you are strong enough without them. And I thought that that was fantastic. I will read you one of the poems in here. It's just really simple. It says, "I know you think you've won, that you broke me, but darling, my dreams were always so much grander than just you and I." And it's just like poems like that, little snippets of information and emotions like that, that really just get you. And I thoroughly recommend this poetry collection if you want to read some more hard-hitting poetry. It was fantastic, and I thoroughly loved it. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about, I don't own a physical copy of, but is a book that I loved, and both times I read it, I cried, and that was Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. This book follows a young girl who, she's not young, she's a middle-aged woman who is looking for a new job after getting fired, and she comes across the job to be a caretaker for this man named Will, who is a paraplegic, which he's a quadriplegic. I'm sorry, he's a quadriplegic, which means he's paralyzed from the neck down. And it's just their relationship of him coming to accept his new life as it is now, as well as their love relationship. And it was just a fantastic book. So many feels, so many things that just took me by surprise, and I was very choked up by. The ending of this book gets me every time, and I cried like a big old baby. I really think that there are not a lot of books that deal with the topic of these type of illnesses. A lot of it is more like chronic illness and cancer and things like that. And this full body disability that the main character Will has is portrayed in such a way where it's very hard to kind of understand what he's going through. But I feel like the book really does a great job at putting her in the position of wanting to have him live a full and happy life. And overall, toward the end of the book, I was just like sobbing, and it was great. It was wonderful. I love a book that can give me all the feels, and that was definitely one of them. The next book that I'm going to talk about, talking about all the feels, and that is, of course, The Last Song by Nicholas Sparks. This book is so sad. The movie is sad. The book is sad. It follows the movie pretty much to a T. There are a couple of things here and there that are not the same, but for the most part, it's pretty spot on. So if you've watched the movie, you know. This book follows a girl named Ronnie and her brother, what's his name? I don't remember the little boy's name, but it doesn't matter. It follows Ronnie as she takes summer vacation to her father's beach house, and her father has requested that they spend the summer with her because he really wants to spend some time with them. Ronnie and her dad don't have the best relationship, and when she finds out that his health is not in the best situation, she really comes to terms with the fact that she wasted so much time hating her father when she should have had a better relationship and appreciated the time that she had with him. And to the end of the story, I mean, the tears were just rolling down my face. This gave me all the feels. With a book like this, it's kind of hard not to. Nicholas Sparks knows how to write a good emotional story that punches you right in the gut, and this is no different. I definitely recommend it if you have seen the movie and you want to read more into the book. It was very good. I still, even though I've watched the movie, thoroughly enjoyed the book. Okay, the next one should not be any surprise to you guys if you've been following my channel for quite some time, and you know this is one of my favorite books of all time, and that is 5 Feet Apart by Rachel Lippincott. This follows 2 teenagers who have cystic fibrosis, and they meet in the hospital during one of their extended trips there because they are both having issues with their health and need to get it under control. The main character of this book, I cannot think of her name for the life of me, Stella, is really anal about her health and her recovery, and she really wants to get better, but she meets, why can't I think of their names right now? I'm the worst. Will, okay. But she meets Will, and she sees how much of a lack of interest he has in getting better and in recovery, and so she's really hell-bent on making sure that he takes his proper medication and he does what he has to do to get better, and through that they form this relationship. However, with CF patients, they can't get more than 6 feet with distance between each other, or else they can contract the specific type of CF that they have, and it puts them at serious risk for no longer being able to have a lung transplant as well as death. So it's just their relationship of trying to defy those odds, and it's a fantastic book. I loved it so much. I read it and I had a chapter left, and I came out to my husband and I was sobbing, like physically, like almost like wanted to curl up in a ball sobbing, because I was just so heart-wrenched by the story. And he was thoroughly concerned for me. He's like, "Are you okay? Like, what's going on?" I'm like, "This is happening," and I was just crying so much. And then I ended up finishing the book and immediately watching the movie and cried a whole bunch more. So it was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I recommend it if you want to read about this story. I have heard from people that have cystic fibrosis that this is not the best representation. However, I loved the book so much that I can't part myself from it. I still recommend it if you want to read it, but just go into it knowing that it's not the best representation for this disease. Alright, another one of my favorite books of all time, a book that was in the last video, and that is Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. You're not surprised? No, nobody's surprised. I'm not going to try to explain this again. If you guys watched my last video, you know. If you watch anybody's videos really in the past couple of months, you know. But this book tore me apart. This book ripped out my heart, stomped on it, put it back in my chest, ripped it out again, and did it all over again at least 3 times. I was sobbing throughout this book. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting on my vanity chair by myself in the dark, trying to be quiet because my grandma was in the living room, my husband was asleep in the bedroom, sobbing my eyes out, like to the point where it was like one of those sobs where like you can't breathe. It was terrible. It was just terrible, but it was the best all at the same time. This book is so fantastic, and a book that can make you happy and sob like that in the span of from the front cover to the end cover is a fantastic book. And this is the reason why I love this book so much, because it gave me all of the feels in one sitting, and I just couldn't. I just can't. Every time I think of this book, I want to reread it every time I think about it. So obviously it was fantastic. It was amazing. I loved it. Please read it. Please read it. All right, the next book that I'm going to talk about is a staple, a booktube staple, a reading staple. Most people have read this through some point of their life, and that is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This wasn't my favorite book that I've ever read, and I think it's because I've watched the movie previously and then read the book, and it just wasn't as exciting for me reading it the first time. However, reading this book, I still cried like a big old baby. If you guys don't know what this is about, how could you not? But I will explain it. It is about 2 people who meet at a cancer support group. They are both in remission from their cancers, and they end up creating this really lovely relationship and falling in love. But with cancer becomes a great health risk for both of them, and some things happen, and it is very sad. It is a very sad book, and it has a lot of topics about death and morality. Overall, it's a fantastic book if you're looking for more of something on the younger spectrum of YA that is still hard-hitting. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Obviously, I cried. It's not my favorite book. I don't think I can rant and rave about it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for people. I think I just read it at the wrong time in my life. However, I still think it's a fantastic book that deals with really hard topics very well, and I'm glad that I read it. Another book that I want to talk about is a book that, again, that I don't absolutely love, but still dealt with some really hard-hitting topics and a lot of really important topics that people need to be reading about, especially if you're going through the situation, although I'm not sure this is the best book for that, and that is All the Right Places by Jennifer Niven. This is a book that talks a lot about suicide and suicidal tendencies, mania, bipolar disorder, depression. It has a lot of hard-hitting topics. It follows two characters that go to the same school that meet on the top of a bell tower. Both of them are thinking about jumping, and there sparks their relationship, a friendship, then a relationship. And this book is very strange, and I definitely feel like throughout the book I was thoroughly confused because a lot of this is very disjointed, and you can definitely tell where the bipolar and mania comes from this book. And it was very hard to read. It was definitely a hard-hitting book that was very difficult to read, but overall it was a very good book. And of course, when I got to the ending of that book, I just couldn't. I did watch the movie and I didn't love it as much as I liked the book, but overall it was a very good book that talks about a lot of heavy topics, and a book that definitely made me cry, and still a book that I think about every now and again and think, wow, it did that. So there you go. The next book that I want to talk about is a book that I no longer own. It is one of my favorite books of all time, but I gave it to one of my subscribers. I will eventually be getting my own physical copy again, but until then, the book that I'm talking about is The Chaos of Standing Still. This book was so amazing. This follows a teenage girl who is coping with the death of her best friend. It is basically the year anniversary of her best friend's death, and on her phone she has one unread text message from her friend that she has yet to open because she feels like if she reads that text message, she's finally letting go of her best friend, and she doesn't know if she's ready for that. And as she's coming home on New Year's Eve, she gets stuck at the airport during this huge snowstorm, and she bumps into a guy who happens to have the same phone case as her, and they switch phones. And it just becomes this crazy whirlwind relationship, as well as a book about accepting the here and the now, and accepting that death and grief is a part of life. And it was a fantastic book that had some really awesome talks about coping with death and the mechanisms that some people use to get there, as well as some ways that people react to the things that happen to them in their lives. And I felt like it was a really fantastic book. All in all, I would definitely recommend it if you're looking for a hard-hitting book that really talks about some really interesting topics, as well as a little bit of a love story in there. So I really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to get another physical copy of that book. Okay, the second to the last book I'm going to talk about is another book from my last video. Actually, the last two books were featured in that last video, and this is Red, White, and Royal Blue. I'm not going to go over the synopsis of this again, but if you guys have read it, you will know this book is really fantastic. It's a fantastic queer book that has a lot of awesome representation in this book, but the very end of this book that talks a lot about acceptance and coming together as a community, as a whole, as one person, to accept the people that you know that are in your life as who they are, no matter what they identify as, was a fantastic thing that I saw in this book that really brought tears to my eyes and really tugged at my heartstrings, because I feel like that's something that we're missing in this world, is a sense of community and respect and love for the people around us, regardless of their sexual orientation. And I felt like this book really talked about that well, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt like not only did this book make me laugh out loud and make me smile, but it had the capacity to make me cry and make me feel for the characters in more ways than one. And so for that, I loved it. It made me cry, and I cannot wait to reread this. Alright, and the last book that I'm going to talk about in this video, I did mention in my last video this one was going to be represented, and that is, of course, Beach Read by Emily Henry. This book had so many fantastic themes that were talked about in this book. It talks a lot about grief and death and acceptance of a person leaving your life. And when we get to the very end of this book, there is a father-daughter relationship kind of climax, and it comes to a conclusion in this book. And it really very much reminded me of the relationship with my dad and how much I love and adore my father. And for that reason, the portion of this book just had me in absolute shambles. I was literally sobbing. I know I said that so many times in this video, but I was just genuinely heartbroken for this character because I couldn't imagine living my life like that. And I think that it was a fantastic book that talked about such wonderful topics of death and grief and acceptance, but also had a lighthearted, fun moments to it. And it was a fantastic, wonderful book. I definitely recommend it if you're looking for a good read of romance. But yeah, the end of this book really got me in the feels and made me cry more than I ever thought that a romance could, and I'm so happy that I read this. Alright, here are all the books that I featured in this video, books that made me cry, books that gave me the feels, and genuinely just made me want to tear my heart out and throw it across the room. So I hope that you guys got some good recommendations for in your feels books, and hopefully this was helpful for you. Thank you guys so much for sticking around and watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give it a big O thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave, and of course leave any comments, questions, and suggestions in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!